just introduce myself. My name is Rebecca Johnson. I'm the co-host of a podcast about Supergirl called Supergirl Radio. And if you are wondering why a Supergirl podcaster is talking about Batman-related things today, it's because I'm also a big Batman fan. So welcome to the Gotham, the final season panel. And just to introduce my friend over here, would you like to tell people who you are?
Yeah, I'm nobody, but my name is Sark Sarkesian, and I have a Twitter handle of Holy Bat Pastor, which is not some type of pseudo-pious declaration. It's just a riff on the old holyisms of Robin, and I used to be in pastoral work, so it's something I hope to return to, but I am crazy about the Batman. I have what I describe as a severe Batman bias, and the world revolves around Batman, and I even have my number one apprenticing Batman fan, my wife Benita, with me here today, who, in spite of a sprained ankle, came to cheer on and show her support for her love of Gotham, so it's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, so we're just going to talk about Gotham Season 5 and what happened during the season and how it wrapped up the show. So this is very interactive. If you want to share your thoughts, ask questions, whatever, feel free to chime in, and we'll just have a discussion among fans. So the first thing we were going to talk about is, in terms of Season 5, what did we like about Gotham? What did you like about the Season 5 and what was going on there? So I'm going to put that to you first.
Okay, I get to go first. Everything. I told you I have a severe Batman bias, so yes, I tend to like most of what I see on Gotham. I always have. Every season has been unique, but Season 5, I tried to make some notes, and there was no way, once I started to list all my favorite things about the season, it just became overwhelming. So I'll just call a few of them out. The continuing dynamic with Enigma and Oswald Cobblepot, even though we only had 12 episodes, they continue to have just this incredible relationship. It's complex at times, and then other times it's so simple. Really enjoyed that. I like seeing some firsts. I did write down a few of the firsts that I enjoyed. We saw the first live-action Low Boys Gang from the comics, the first live-action Street Demons, the first live-action Mutant Leader, which I didn't see that coming when he made the appearance on the screen. I was like, oh my God. And my apprenticing Batman fan, Benita, she wasn't sure of the connection at the time, but she remembered. She said, "You're really excited, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." Definitely the live-action, if you could call it live-action, appearance of Scarface. Loved that. And then live-action Magpie, our first one. So those were some of my favorite things from the season.
That's a good list. Penguin and Riddler built a submarine. Mm-hmm. That was surprising to me that they went that extra mile to get out of Gotham to try to build a sub and get
Determined.
out. Yeah, and that's a good point about a bunch of those firsts. I only know Magpie from the Superman comics, from the Man of Steel reintroduction by John Byrne. So it was cool to see Magpie pop up, and that was a neat interaction between Penguin and Selina. They had some interactions against Magpie in that episode. So yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think for me, Scarface was definitely one of my favorite things of the season, because Scarface and the ventriloquist to me are, Batman has a lot of weird villains, but I think Scarface is the weirdest. And it cracks me up so much that they can make such a quirky character like that seem really scary. And I think Gotham did a really good job, because Scarface could be something that could be really silly, and you could really, put it down as something campy and stupid, but he was scary. The ventriloquist in Scarface shot some people. So I really liked that introduction, because I was surprised by it. I was delighted that it was scary, but it also did have a little bit of a comedic flair to it, which I think it deserved a little bit, because Penguin, I think, Riddler tried to treat Scarface with a lot of respect, Mr. Scarface, and Penguin was like, "What is happening here?" So I thought that was really great.
Yeah, it was almost like this meta moment. It acknowledged that there are those out there who might be dismissive of the character. So like he was in the role of the dismissive one. Like, are you serious? We're really going to tolerate this? And but you're right, he was scary, especially when what is his name? Arthur Penn, brandish the gun.
Yeah.
And it reminded me, all of a sudden I was back watching Batman the Animated Series. I was like just having flashbacks. I'm like, oh my God, they're really doing this. That interesting psychological edge of the characters was great to see.
And I think that was what was always so good about Gotham, is that they treated these villains with a lot of reverence in a way, because they wanted to do them right and stay kind of true to who those villains are. Even as it's kind of a different take. Gotham played around with the origin stories and made it their own, but I think they really nailed it with Scarface. And one of the things I really liked in terms of the villains of the season is Selina's storyline, where she's seeking revenge on Jeremiah. So she goes on this mission to find him, and she encounters the character known as Echo, but I guess we all figure she's kind of a Harley Quinn character. They just don't call her that. And that was pretty terrifying too. Gotham did a good job. I don't know how they got away with it on the hour that they did on TV, but they did some really pretty crazy stuff with the Russian roulette that they had in there. So I thought that all of that was really intense, and I enjoyed I think even Echo and Selina had I hate to say cat fight. It's inevitable, and I'm very sorry for the pun. But that I thought was really well done, because in the comics, like I'm just thinking of Batman Hush, Catwoman and Harley Quinn have a fight, I think, in that story. So it was cool to see them sort of duking it out in that storyline. So I really enjoyed what they did with Selina and how she went after Jeremiah in season 5.
Yeah, and I appreciated about that storyline. Bruce is watching all of this, and you can tell that he's uncomfortable with the vengeance, with the payback, and of course that's molding him into the hero that he will become. Yeah,
and speaking of villains, and I guess that's inevitable to talk about when we talk about Gotham, because it has so many villains and so many good ones. I also really liked the way they used Jeremiah in season 5. He did kind of have a different look once he goes into the chemicals, which I guess is a look that is realistic, because if he goes into a vat of chemicals, he's not going to come out looking too good. But I really enjoyed the way they brought the Mad Hatter, Jervis Tetch stuff back into play with the Ace Chemicals episode, where Bruce is sort of not under a spell as so much, but Jeremiah plays around with Bruce's parents and makes him relive a lot of that. And so I really liked how they sort of went back to the beginning. All good TV shows, the final season is going to circle back around to the beginning somehow, and I think they did that really well.
Very good job of that. Other highlights that I picked up on, love the fact that Cobblepot had that adorable bulldog that he called Ed. I mean, that was awesome. I love that. I mean, they played that to comedic effect so often throughout the season.
Sometimes Ed would abandon him.
Yes.
Didn't he?
Yes. Yeah. Ed had his fill.
So what did you think about the No Man's Land aspect? They tried to adapt it a little bit. No Man's Land, if you don't know, is a huge comic book event that takes place in the Batman mythology in Gotham, and it's kind of like, if you've seen The Dark Knight Rises, they sort of tried to do No Man's Land in that as well, where Gotham is separated out from the rest of sort of civilized existence, and so everybody's stuck on Gotham, and all the villains claim territories to different sections of Gotham, and so they tried to do that on the show. How did you think they did? Did they succeed in making that successful?
I thought so. I'm not the big comic book guy, but one of the few comic book runs that I'm kind of familiar with is No Man's Land. Sometime back they had a recorded version of the novel, and I purchased this on compact disc, and when I was in my car one particular year, I was listening to the novel beat for beat. And so that's where I developed kind of an appreciation for the storyline. So when I heard that they would be doing this, I was thrilled. And one thing there was something I missed because of the No Man's Land theme. They were inside a lot, which, I missed all those great exterior shots that Gotham has been famous for. But it makes sense, if the streets are a place literally where no one can survive easily. It would make sense that everyone's on the inside. But that all those indoor sets, I remember early on thinking, I feel so claustrophobic, seems like we're in these we're not going outside much. And I almost felt like that was intentional, that they wanted you to feel like someone who was trapped inside. But I really liked what they did, especially maybe it's my Dark Knight Rises bias that I have, which they also introduced that theme into the film, where Gotham is kind of isolated and no one's supposed to leave the island. So I thought they did an outstanding job with it. It was at times so dark, it almost was unnerving. But I think that's the point.
Yeah,
it's a very bleak time.
Yeah, I agree. I think they did a good job of trying to adapt No Man's Land as much as possible, because the one thing that the Dark Knight Rises didn't have the opportunity to capitalize on, just because they didn't have this big world for Christian Bale's Batman, but Gotham did, because it had basically almost every Batman Rogue gallery member was there, so they had the opportunity to have these different villains actually claim different parts of Gotham, and so they did that to good effect. Especially even one of my favorite parts of season 5 was getting to see Poison Ivy again.
Oh, yes.
I think Peyton List really did. I mean, they had different actresses come on to play Ivy in different respects, but I thought she was really great, because she was the first time, I think, ever in my history of watching adaptations or reading comics where I was actually really scared of Poison Ivy.
I said the same thing. Yeah, that was the first time Poison Ivy was frightening to me.
Yeah, and so I really liked the fact that she had claimed a certain part of Gotham where she sort of owned her environment, and they did a good job of using her to introduce Selina to that the stuff that was going to turn her into the supernatural Catwoman. So I think they used Poison Ivy to a really, really good effect.
Yeah. Yeah, and they acknowledged the age difference. Wrote it into the script, didn't shy away, and it was believable, on that level. So yeah, and the CGI, by the way, with the plants, and the vines, I thought was top notch. Yeah,
and she especially did a really good job of being really commanding, especially when she was with Bruce. So I think she was A+ Poison Ivy for me. And since we talked a little bit about the Dark Knight Rises, we got some Bane in season 5. So how did you think about, or what did you think about how they adapted Bane?
I like the interpretation. The one thing that Gotham has always been, they do a top-notch job with, is they don't pass judgment on the different iterations of Batman throughout the ages. They're just going to give subtle nods here and there to like everything and see if you pick up on it. So, clearly there were nods to the Dark Knight Rises. He had almost a Tom Hardy type voice. He held himself that way. Even the mask. Some of the plot line with he and Nyssa Al Ghul was reminiscent of the interactions with Talia in the movie. I like how they were. Often Tom Hardy's Bane was criticized for not being as true to the comics, perhaps. Even though I love that iteration of Bane, this one did try to line up with some of the backstory. Being held in the prison, even his name. I liked that he was a former friend of Jim Gordon, and I felt like they did a good job of showing you where Bane's character would go eventually when he does go toe-to-toe with the Batman. So, yeah, I really liked his performance.
Yeah, if we were going to talk about things that we didn't like in Season 5 of Gotham, which I think is a fair thing to say, sometimes you're going to like certain things and sometimes you're not going to like certain things. I think the Nyssa... I could have gotten more from her. Maybe it's because I really liked the Nyssa Al Ghul on Arrow so much, so it was hard for me to see Nyssa another way. But she didn't terrify me as much as I kind of wish that she had.
Okay.
Although I think she did threaten a baby, so I guess that does make her pretty cold-hearted. But yeah, I liked that they at least tried to surprise you a little bit, because I went in thinking she would be Talia.
Oh, did you really? Okay.
So the fact that they used the Nyssa card, I guess, was a good surprise.
Yeah, at first I was like, oh, why didn't they just call her Talia? But I understand they're probably trying to distinguish themselves from. They didn't want to be accused of just a flat-off rip-off of The Dark Knight Rises. You're just doing the same thing. So I get it. So
were there any things that you kind of looked at the show and you were like, that could have been better. I could have gotten more from that.
Yes, that we didn't get 10 seasons. Um, that season 5 didn't get 22 episodes, and that the season 5 finale, if I'm being serious, I would have thought if you're limited to 12 episodes, that season finale should have been like a big, 2 or 3 hour send off, like really just give the fans, let them go crazy and feast on Gotham. Those are the obvious things that I wish could have been different about the season. I'm trying to think. See, I've rewatched it this week, and like I saw it with different eyes, and things that I didn't necessarily appreciate seemed okay this time.
Like what?
The first thing, I hate to say this because I'm like okay with it now, but the bat suit
Oh, okay.
was a little off for me, and I only watched it again like the next day, so I haven't seen it in several months. But going back, I don't know, it was something about it. You take advantage of your large screen flat panel, with 4K resolution, and you stop it and you examine all the details, and it was really like an amalgam of a first attempt bat suit. Plus, it had some. I noticed the bat emblem on the chest was very reminiscent of Batman Begins. The cowl, I don't know, maybe almost like a Batman Forever type thing. I thought I noticed a Batman Forever style buckle on the belt. And then a lot of it was just almost seemed like it was a new attempt at a bat suit. So I'm not necessarily crazy about it, but it's okay now. Yeah, I don't dislike it like the first time I saw it.
Yeah, I don't think I ever hated it because I think I did appreciate the fact that it was Bruce's first attempt
exactly
at a suit. So I can go with it using my imagination to know that later on down the road he'll tighten things up and make it a little better. And
next month, I think we've all seen like 300 different bat suits if you count the comics and animated features. So he must be changing them out with some regularity.
I mean, I've definitely seen worse bat suits.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so I didn't mind it too much. I guess we could talk about that finale if you want to while we're here. So one of the big things about the finale is that they aged up Selina.
Yes.
So what did you think about the actress who came in to play Selina in the last episode?
I really thought she was great. I kept watching her this recent watch and thought, she really does look to me like Cameron Bacondinova. Is that how you say her last name?
That's a
reasonable attempt.
That's
maybe?
a good attempt. Yeah.
It looks like her 10 years later. Like she'd slimmed up, and the hair, the curly hair, the hair color, the dark eyebrows. I mean, she had a lot of her facial features. So I liked it. And I'm not sure, was David Mazouz in the bat suit?
I thought so. I don't know if anybody else knows, but I think he is.
Yeah, I can understand if he's covered up with the mask, I can see why they didn't have to get a different actor.
Yeah.
Had he come in playing Bruce Wayne, then maybe they would have pick someone different. I hated that Cameron was not able to see it all the way through. However, it sounds like she was okay with it. And the what is the young lady's name? Lily?
Lily Simmons.
Yeah, I thought she did a great job.
Yeah, I did too. I totally bought that she was the adult Selina, and she had to come in for this one episode and take what Cameron had done for 5 seasons and boil that relationship down to the essence of it. And I think she got it, and she looked the part, and I thought the rooftop scene with Batman and Selina I thought was really moving and emotional, and so I thought that they did a good job with that relationship. I think the Bruce Selina stuff was what really initially got me hooked on Gotham, because I was going to watch it anyway because I'm a Batman fan, but the first, if we're going to be honest, the first 10, 11 episodes, it was rough there for a little while. They were really, in my opinion, they were struggling to find what the show was going to be and find out what they wanted to do with it. And I think it's episode 12, I think, of the first season is where I was like, okay, I think they know what they're doing now. And it's the episode where Bruce and Selina are in the house, walking on the handrails of the staircase or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that they really got it when they finally nailed down the Bruce Selina relationship. They finally decided what they were going to do with that. So to see that come to fruition there at the end of the show, even if it was with a different Selina, I think they did a really nice job of, because that's a huge deal. Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, that's a big deal. And so I think they got it right, and they really honored that relationship. So I was glad to see that. The one thing I am still kind of mixed about in terms of the finale is I don't know exactly how I feel about Barbara, because I thought she was gonna die in season 5. I think
a lot of people did.
I thought she was a goner, and maybe that was me just assuming, oh, she's gonna have little Babs,
Right.
and then she's gonna get killed off, and then Jim and Lee are gonna raise her, and that would be great. So I just had the whole season I was prepping myself for the death of Barbara. I was like, is this the episode? Is it going to happen this week? Because I had grown to really like the character of Barbara, because the first season she was so annoying. It seemed like everyone I know who watched the show did not like her.
Yeah, she got a lot of hate that first
And then
year.
she took a villainous turn, and everybody was like,
Everybody loved her.
this is great.
Yeah.
We are here
Stabby
for Stabby Babs now.
Mhm.
And so I just had prepared myself for the death of one of my favorite characters on the show, and it turned out she did not die. She lasted.
I'm not really sure what precipitated that decision, but I think many fans thought that probably would happen, because that she would serve the purpose of burying his child
Right,
somehow.
right.
We didn't know how that was going to happen. How many of you were shocked when they, when they did the deed right there? I'm assuming right there in the office. So we thought that she would be ushered out kind of conveniently. At least I did. But that's actually in my notes. One of my favorite things from the season was the redemption of her character.
Yeah.
I really appreciated, I almost felt like, to an absurd degree, she's us. We have things in our past that we're not proud of, and sometimes we have a season of poor decision making. And there was still hope for her character. And I thought it was so funny, her annoyance with Jim. She kind of kept pressing that question, if she said it explicitly, I think maybe one time, but she was implying it often, you don't think I can be a good mother, do you? And I'm thinking to myself, no, you simple woman. You've killed how many people? I mean, you've lived a life of crime? No, I don't think of mommy when I think of you. So it was so funny, but you could tell she was hurt by that.
Yeah.
And key moments I would notice, especially the blowing up of Haven. Oh, that really got to her.
Oh, yeah.
You could see, and I remember asking myself, I wonder if the actress is doing that purposely, because her facial expressions are very different than we normally see from Barbara. And sure enough, those must have been conscious decisions, because she starts questioning her role, and then of course what type of mother she can be. And then there's I really appreciate that dialogue between her and Lee. And I wish I could remember the episode title, but where Lee is able to give her the encouragement she needs. Hey, look, you don't have to leave. You could stay here, and between the three of us, we could do right by this child. Jim doesn't want you to not be a part of the child's life. So I really like that 10 years later, she's made a complete turnaround.
Yeah.
She's become a legit businesswoman and a good mother, and so it makes you happy for the Barbara Gordon character.
Yeah, she would at least grow up with a more stable mother.
Right.
But I guess I'm mixed on the decision to make her a redhead. I know why they did it, because Batgirl is very famous for having red hair, and they kind of wanted somebody in the, to have a Barbara with red hair in the finale, I guess.
I felt the same way.
But I don't know, it felt a little forced to me with the...
Forced, yeah.
Yes, but I mean, I like it. I just, I look at it and I'm like, well... I don't know if it's totally earned, but I guess they couldn't shoot a scene where she's dyeing her hair. That would be a little silly.
Yeah. And I thought the little girl that played the child, Barbara Gordon, I thought she was really cute, and I thought she did a nice job of acting like an earnest little girl who loves her mom and her dad. And did you notice that I'm pretty sure every time they showed her, she had some form of purple clothing on. Did you pick up on that?
No, I didn't. I took it.
And the only time I can remember any Batgirl wearing purple, it took me right back, and I had to wonder, was that one of those intentional nods just to make you kind of think? So you see someone with kind of reddish hair, auburn hair, and then you see those shades of purple in her attire. So I felt like that was a callback to the original Batgirl that we've seen.
It's very much an homage to the Batgirl character.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of Lee, we mentioned Lee. She came back trying to kill Jim Gordon, I think, at one point, and then things ended up okay. Lee has had a very interesting trajectory throughout the series.
Yes.
And
to say the least.
so she came back, and I thought she had a nice moment in terms of talking about raising little Babs. She and Alfred had a really nice moment where
awesome scene. Yes.
Alfred tries to encourage her in terms of his experience of being a father to Bruce.
To Bruce, yes.
So I thought that was a really nice moment that bonded them as characters. Because when I like to think of maybe I don't need 10 seasons of Gotham, because I like to imagine like what would it be like if this set of these characters are there 5 years from now, what that's going to look like. And so I imagine that Lee and Alfred are going to have to work really closely together once Bruce becomes Batman, because she's going to have to stitch him up and do all kinds of medical things for him. So I like the idea that they got a little closer there towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I always wanted more of that throughout the series, but yes, I was glad to see it. Yes, and then of course, Lee and the tears welling up in her eyes at hearing Alfred's impassioned description of his relationship with Bruce. That was awesome. Yeah.
And what did you think about one of the other big things that happened on the show in season 5 is that Jim and Lee get married.
Yes.
They have a big wedding at the GCPD. So
that is my favorite episode.
Oh, really?
Of the season, yes. Ace Chemicals was a close runner-up, but the trial of Jim Gordon, that episode for some reason resonated with me. And even though there was plenty of action and drama, the first, for the bulk of the episode, I have to admit, I was a sucker. Maybe it's because I'm so in love with my wife. But that wedding moment, and I think I tried to be analytical about it. Like, why am I digging this so much? I started to tear up again watching it yesterday. We know that these two characters, two actors actually met on the set of Gotham, and I remember it takes me back to that first season, and I would say to friends, man, they seem like they really got a lot of chemistry going on. And then it was later that year we find out they're dating. I went, wow, they do have a lot of chemistry. So I think we were seeing something real between them, at the risk of sounding overly romantic. But they have a child now, they're married, and so I'm sure a lot of memories were built on the set. So here we're watching the music. Oh God, the music was incredible at that moment. And she comes down, and of course everyone's eyes are riveted on Lee. And the camera gets these shots of our favorite characters. And they're all sitting together. They're paired up here, there, and everywhere, and having little side conversations. And it was as if some of it was not even scripted. It seemed so natural that they were looking at this moment. They're about to close out the series, and they're not going to see each other on a regular basis anymore. And so the season of their lives is passing. And it felt like the emotion and the joy was really coming through their performances. And then you have that moment where Bruce stops. He gets caught up after the wedding, and he grabs Selena and kisses her, and she gives in. And there are so many moments like that are so Batman-esque, but so Gotham at the same time. So that's a few of the reasons that particular scene and that particular episode is my number one.
That episode was a real change in format for Gotham, because it was kind of a Jim Gordon, This Is Your Life sort of run down through Jim's time in Gotham and what he had done and all the choices he made. And it was kind of surreal the way they sort of painted it, like he was in heaven, on trial kind of a thing. And so it was definitely different from the grittier real world stuff that normally happens week to week. And I really like the change in format. I actually wish they had done that maybe a little more.
I would have loved that. Yeah.
But I like the risk taking there. And it's worth noting that Ben McKenzie wrote that episode.
Oh, is that the one that he
and
wrote? Okay.
I think it's really interesting, the director who directed that episode, because of her character's relationship with Lee Tompkins and Jim Gordon, is that Aaron Richards directed that episode.
Okay.
So you had Stabby Babs directing the wedding of Jim and Lee. And
that's awesome.
They had that love triangle, and Babs and Leslie had had some genuine drag-out fights before.
Yeah.
And, I remember a really brutal one. I think it was back in season 1.
Season 1.
Was it in season 1? Towards the end
first time she tried to kill her?
Oh, yeah, the first time she tried to kill her. So I think it's amusing to me that Stabby Babs directed the wedding of Jim and Leslie.
Yeah,
so,
there were so many personal touches in that episode, And so, that doesn't surprise me.
Well, do you have any, in terms of season 5, were there any real standout performers for you in terms of the characters and the acting scenes. I know we've talked a lot about the different characters and their moments, but when you think of season 5, who's the performance that really sticks out for you?
I appreciate when I say I'm going to pick one actor out. It doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge the others. They all did such a good job. For example, I remember my wife and I were watching the episode where Selena is just distraught at the fact that she's not going to be able to walk again. And there's like 2 or 3 moments where she gives it all she's got. I've never seen acting performance out of her previously. I mean, she's good, but I mean, she got emotional. She would cry, kick and scream, and I mean, she gave it everything. And I was just blown away. And she's not the only one. But the name that keeps coming to mind, though, and every time I watch through the season, I keep thinking, man, I'm so glad that guy is on this show. And that is Chris Chalk, Lucius Fox.
Oh.
There is a charm that he brings to the character. And he's not in every scene, but when he is in a scene, it's almost like he owns it. And there's one in particular, and I don't know if the audience will remember, where Nigma has snuck back into the GCPD. He's looking for a file or some information, and Lucius stumbles across him going through the file cabinet. And it was so funny, for those who know the show, Lucius essentially performs a lot of the functions that Ed once did,
Yeah.
and so these 2 smart guys, you can see that Ed clearly is threatened by Lucius's intellect and is constantly trying to one-up him. And at one point, Lucius has the file that Nigma wants, and he's holding it. And in one last desperate attempt, Ed is going to wrestle it from him. And we all know that the Riddler from the comics is not necessarily the bulky muscle man. His muscle is his brain.
Right.
And he tries to grab this thing, and he scuffles for a minute. And Lucius just stands there, and he says, just why? It's so perfectly delivered, but it was that type of moment that Chris Chalk delivered again and again and again. Every scene that he was in, he just brought a little bit of humor. And I was really charmed by his Lucius Fox.
I'm surprised by that. That's a good answer. I think for me, I really became a big fan of the Riddler over the course of the show, Corey Michael Smith. I think Robin Lord Taylor, of course, his Penguin is.
Oh my!
He took the Penguin from a chubby little nightclub owner in the comics and on the animated series. And he made him a real threat. Like, the Penguin is a real threat in Gotham. But I really liked the way they handled the Riddler with his 2 personalities. And especially in season 5, when he has this dilemma of, what I'm missing all my memories, what have I done? And it was one of those things where the Riddler for so long when he was really in his Riddler persona, he didn't seem to care about all the bad things he had done. But
Sure.
but here, when he wakes up and he's like, oh my gosh, where was I last night? What
Right.
was I doing? He actually had a heart. He was concerned about what bad thing he had done. And the big twist with him being the one who blew up Haven.
Yes.
That was
Didn't
really
see that
shocked by
coming.
that. I had no idea who had done it. And to see that Riddler had, because of the chip in his head, he had been manipulated. And I thought that was a really good twist. And I thought Corey Michael Smith did a really good job at
He did an
playing
amazing
that
job.
off.
Yeah, and his frustration would make me laugh, but I felt frustration with him.
Yeah.
Every time he would wake up, even more aggravated than the last time. So he did an excellent job.
Well, so in terms of Gotham, I guess some fans like it, some fans don't. With Batman, there's always going to be, and even with any comic book character, there's going to be some people, not my Batman, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
where it's not to your taste or whatever. And so I know that, at least with some Batman fans I know, they sort of dismissed Gotham and didn't want to pay attention to it. But what do you think Gotham did really well in terms of the Batman mythology, in terms of what it brought to Batman as a character in Batman's world?
That's an excellent question. As I was thinking about, I had the mental notes in my head how I would want to respond to that. I stumbled across an article from earlier this week, Forbes magazine, and the headline reads, why Gotham might be the best live-action adaptation.
Really?
Apparently, the 5th season came out on Blu-ray this week.
Recently.
I didn't realize that. And so you can buy the whole series on Blu-ray as a set. And it was a fantastic article. I would recommend any fan, well, even if you're on the fence and you're not sure whether you should be a fan of Gotham, read this article. It probably more eloquently than I would ever say details some of the very reasons why it very well could be. In terms of what it leaves for its legacy, I couldn't even make a list of the first live action of whatever that it brought to us. That's invaluable, because one thing I think, you're right, the first season, there was almost a dismissiveness from oftentimes the Batman community toward the show before it even aired.
And I think it was largely due to the fact that Batman was not in it.
Yes, and this really bothered. And I thought that was a very short-sighted reaction, because I know you and I had a conversation once. I'm not trying to intentionally play like a spiritual card, but kind of like a historical card. Oftentimes you'll hear in the Christian community, for example, that the New Testament is about Jesus and the Old Testament isn't. And that shows a gross misunderstanding about the content of the Old Testament. The Old Testament is doing nothing but pointing to everything. Every line is pointing to the one who's coming. Well, I used to compare Gotham as like Old Testament Batman. It's like, it's pointing. The whole point is Batman. Just because you don't see him, everything is pointing to him. Everything's going to lead to him. All roads lead through Batman. I think I'll live by that. And it truly, when people say it didn't have Batman, but it did. You know, I mean, how often do you hear people say, wow, on Crime Alley that night, Bruce Wayne died, you know, when his parents did. Well, if that's true, and most fans tend to agree with that statement, then clearly it was about Batman. We were seeing the formation of Batman. And another reason I was so shocked at the response, I had been a devoted Batman fan for all of about 1 year when they made the announcement that they had a series in development. I had thrown myself into it. I said, this stuff is too good. I'm just going to do this for the rest of my life. So when I hear that there's a series being developed called Gotham, it's going to kind of revolve around Jim Gordon, I'm freaking out. I'm like, what? Are you serious? And had they known 5 seasons it would last, and you had told me there are going to be 100 episodes altogether, that's roughly 4,300 minutes of Batman content that the world has never seen, I mean, I would have passed out, I think. Because we will often bring our love of the Batman films and compare the TV series, and we think, well, it can't match up. I'm sorry, just in sheer volume, it more than matches up.
That's true.
Films, as popular as they are, as well regarded as they are not seen by as many people as television is. And I'm convinced that the Batman community has a responsibility for the message of the Batman to get out. There's probably no greater evangelistic tool than a Batman TV series or a Batman focused series. So I think Gotham's legacy, I don't think we can see it yet. I would notice that so many fans would admit, well, I always thought Batman was cool, but man, this series is awesome. This series appealed to people who didn't get into the films, who wouldn't watch the animation, who would never pick up a comic book and still wouldn't pick up a comic book. But all of a sudden, I would have conversations with people at work. They'd say, you're that Batman fan, right? Do you watch this show called Gotham? I said, do I watch Gotham? Please. And so I would have conversations with non-Batman fans that were devoted to watching this crazy soap opera of a show on a weekly basis. Now, who's this Jervis Tetch guy? People who had never heard the word. A lot of Batman fans don't even know what the Mad Hatter's real name is.
Right.
And these non-Batman fans would use terms like Enigma, Jervis Tetch, and they knew details about the Batman fandom that really most Batman fans, or most who say they are, might not know about. So it did an incredible job of getting the message out about these characters and making them real, making them a part of their daily vernacular. And then also the music. I don't know what the long-term result.
It's very underrated. I think,
wow!
as score, yeah.
The Batman franchise has had a reputation for having fantastic music, whether it's an animated thing like Batman the Animated Series, Batman the Brave and the Bold, even the Batman that came out in the mid-2000s.
U2 stuff?
Yes. But also with the films, Hans Zimmer and Danny Elfman. What a legacy of music. And Gotham was right up there. And what diversity of music, too. I mean, it was nothing to hear an old Johnny Cash song and then some kind of alternative thing, rock and roll, and then just the soundtrack, the score, the orchestral score.
Yeah, my favorite bit of music from the show is anytime you kind of get to hang out with the Penguin.
Mm-hmm.
He has
Yes.
his own
He had his own theme, yes.
That was very unique. It really stood out for Penguin. It's actually on one of the DC Comics' big compilation albums that they have.
Oh, okay.
So I'll listen to that just randomly sometimes, just because I like the way that the instrumentation in that is really great. But yeah, I echo that. I think the music in the show is something a lot of people don't talk about, but it really helps set the tone of what's going on.
And there were moments you could tell they would perform new music. Of course, you have standard tracks that repeat themselves, but there would be times where you would hear, oh wow, that is like an Elfman kind of feel coming through, and they wouldn't do it like an outright copy or cover of the Batman theme from Batman in 1989, but you could hear little bits and pieces, or it would have a Dark Knight or Dark Knight Rises riff to it, and you'd think, oh my God, that sounds like something Zimmer would do. So you could tell they intentionally did that throughout the series just to kind of keep things lively. But yeah, incredible music.
Yeah, I think I would echo in terms of like Gotham's legacy and what people are going to take away from it when they even maybe revisit it 10 years from now,
Mm-hmm.
or if people just pick it up 10 years from now. I think that the way that they utilized the world, I mean, Gotham really truly was, I know it sounds cheesy, but it was about the city of Gotham and all the people who were in it. And I think they did a really good job of really telling the stories of all of these people and making them feel like real characters, and then they would intermingle them, and like Mr. Freeze and Firefly would hang out, and getting to see these different villains hang out and do things, whether it was criminal activities or if they were just hanging out at the Sirens bar together. We got to see them hang out. So I think I know this probably sounds terrible, but the show was mostly focused on the villains, I think, for a large degree. I mean, the Bruce and Selina relationship and the Bruce and the Alfred relationship, and even Jim Gordon to an extent had a very big focus on the show, but I think the standouts for me were the villains, and I think that when I will look at that 10 years from now, I will think of those characters and the way they took their own interpretation of those characters and made it their own. They could have just, adapted a storyline and, done it just like the comics. But like even with Mr. Freeze, Scarecrow, they had their own origin stories that were Gotham-esque. And I think that really, that's what I'll take with me. And also, Gotham is one of the most beautifully shot TV shows I've ever seen in my whole life. I'm a camera operator, and so I'm very focused on visuals and the way they used camera and the lighting on that show. The lighting is just fantastic, and so it always looked really beautiful, and it stood out to me because I also, I podcast about the CW Supergirl series, so I watch a lot of the Arrowverse content, and it is night and day in terms of the way they shoot those shows and the way they look, and Gotham is just really distinct in how it is presented.
The aesthetic of the show was clearly so much of its appeal. I love that they continued that tradition started with, I guess, Burton's Batman, where you're not really sure what era you're in, and Batman the Animated Series did that too, so you seem to have modern technology, but everybody had flip phones, and I see a lot of cars from the 60s, the 70s,
like
even
old
the 50s.
Computers, like they didn't have really fancy cars.
Right, and the attire, the costuming. Yeah, let's say something about the costuming. Crazy costuming. Not only comics accurate for some of the characters, but the style and the fashion was top notch. I want to say there was an award won, or maybe someone was nominated for an Emmy, something. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the details, but just for example, we were watching the other night, and I'm caught up in the fact that someone is driven up in this crazy looking Jeep type buggy, and it looked bleak for Bullock and Gordon, and they had gangs on each side, and it was like they were fighting to have him, and all of a sudden, how are they going to get out of this? And someone's guns are blazing from this vehicle, and you're like, oh, somebody's come to rescue him. Who is it? And Barbara King pops out of the vehicle, and she starts strutting toward them. And of course, I'm a guy, so I'm like, wow, man, I mean, she really came to the rescue. And my wife sits up in her chair and she says, you rock that coat, girl! You rock it! And of course, I stopped and I looked, and she was dressed very smartly. But my wife, leave it to my wife, she noticed the fashion constantly for males and females. So yeah, I think it'll be remembered for the costume.
Yeah, I think costuming is a good point. I mean, even with the Joker stuff that they had.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we didn't really talk about him too much, but I consider him to be one of the best Jokers ever in the history of people playing the Joker.
Yes,
I mean, he's
no
up there
doubt.
with Heath Ledger and Mark Hamill for me. And so we got a Jerome, we got Jeremiah. Jeremiah had a fancy, awesome sort of Jack Nicholson-esque hat. So yeah, those costumes, I mean, they really did it up for those villains. Penguin always looked really sharp. Riddler had the green suit at one point. So yeah, I think they did a really good job of really making it feel like, I know some people sort of dismiss it because it's not about Batman, but I think it's I might dare to say that it's one of the more comic book accurate interpretations of the Batman mythos. Even though they took a lot of liberties with things, they really honored the looks of the characters, the essence of what made those characters tick and what drove them. And I think when you see the Riddler, he looks like the Riddler.
Oh, wow,
when you see Selena Kyle, she looks like Catwoman, even though she wore those goggles all the time and she never used them for anything. I was like, why did she have those goggles? They're always just sitting on the top of her head. Which I've worn those before for a whole day, and it hurt my head.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know how she did it, because it actually gives you a headache to wear those things. But
one last thing about legacy, I'll say just 2 words: Harvey Bullock.
Yeah.
Our first live action Harvey Bullock, and I can't see a version of Harvey Bullock in anything, whether it's animated, where I can picture, is it Donald Logue? Is that the actor's name? And what he did for that character, just incredible.
Again, I mean, he looked and sounded and acted like Harvey Bullock. So I thought they did a really good job of making those characters recognizable. Sometimes, I guess my frustration is I would watch Gotham, and then I would watch some of the Arrowverse stuff, and I love the Arrowverse, but sometimes they will do completely different things from what you would imagine those characters to do, which is a choice, and it's fine, but sometimes I just want those characters to be those characters. And so I think that it's nice when I can watch an episode of Gotham and I can see a ventriloquist with a Scarface that looks like Scarface,
Like
so
lifted right off the page.
So I think that's really cool, and I think for Gotham, it is one of those shows that to me it was one of the best DC shows that was on the air at the time, and I think for me it really stands out in terms of the storytelling, and the acting was fantastic always, and the way it was shot was just always beautiful. So I think in terms of what they were doing as a TV show and how they were telling their stories, I think they did a really good job.
Yeah, and I'll also add, for legacy, the diversity. It was a diverse cast right off the rip, and they continued that. And then, 2, I guess this goes along with that, strong women, strong female characters, whether they were good or bad, strong female characters. I thought that was very important.
Yeah, they were everywhere. I mean, you talk about legacy. Gotham also introduced the character of Fish Mooney.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be something that people will talk about anytime you talk about the first appearance of someone. They're going to talk about Fish Mooney debuting on Gotham from Fox. So you'll get those things in the future where I guess Fish Mooney at some point will. I don't know if she already has already, if she's ever shown up in the comics yet. But she'll pop up in some other interpretation of the show.
To, yes.
And so the female characters were always so fun to watch, whether it be Barbara or Lee. Sometimes Barbara and Lee sometimes would flip roles. Sometimes where Barbara was really boring and I didn't like her at one point, but I really liked Lee at that point. And then Lee became really boring, and Barbara got a lot more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish they had balanced it out a little more, but they were always a lot of fun, and I always liked Selena. And of course, I mentioned Poison Ivy. I thought was great.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they always had some really great female characters.
Gender swapping Firefly. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. So, so in terms of season 5. How do you think it wrapped up? Do you think they did a good job of closing it out? I'm actually glad that we got the episodes that we did, because there was the potential they were going to cancel the show and we would never get to see how it ended. And that would have been really unfortunate for a show about Bruce Wayne becoming Batman and never actually getting to the Batman part.
Yeah.
So some shows don't get that luxury. They just get canceled, and who cares? But Gotham was given the opportunity to close it out and tell that story. So do you think it did a good job of actually, closing the book?
I think so. If I'm completely honest, I think they could have really nailed it with like a full 22 order run. And that's probably just, again, that Batman bias, I want more. And they could have taken their time with the storyline, but there are plenty of solid series out there that have 10 episode seasons. So it's certainly doable. And so, yeah, I think they did an admirable job in wrapping things up.
Yeah, I think they, there were a couple episodes that did feel like a little bit of filler, like they were trying to put something in there, and I think they were at some point. I don't know the full backstory about it, but I think initially they were only supposed to be getting 10 episodes,
right.
And then they stretched it out to 12, and so I think that did hurt it a little bit. But the fact that I enjoyed season 5 shows a lot about how they recovered from the change in the episode count, and they were actually able to figure out, problem solve in terms of having to put two more episodes in there. So I think they did a really good job of getting to the end point, even though the finale did seem a little rushed. And they did do some time jumps quite a bit throughout the season, not just in the season finale. They played around with that as well towards the beginning. So I think they did a pretty admirable job for what they were given, and I'm glad they got to close it out the way they wanted to do it, because some of my favorite shows, they got canceled because the ratings were bad, and then you never hear from them again.
Right.
And that's always really heartbreaking when you fall in love with the show and you fall in love with some characters, and then they leave your life and it's all unsolved and unresolved. And so I'm glad that Gotham, because of the quirky nature, got to be quirky up until the end of the run.
Yeah. One thing that I'm probably always going to associate with Gotham, as I said, in 2012, I made this conscious decision. Yeah, I'm in. I'm going to be a crazy Batman fan for the rest of my days. It was right after that, I hear that there's a new series for children announced on the Cartoon Network, Beware the Batman. So, of course, I'm excited. And that poor thing, 26 episodes only, and it would the carpet was kind of pulled out from under it about halfway through the season. It was really strange. And then shortly after, Gotham is announced. I'm excited about that. And then there was kind of that odd kind of backlash from the Batman community, or at least those who allege to be part of the community. And then, of course, just a year later, Batman v Superman is on its way. And then there was kind of sometimes an odd reaction there. And this period of time, I think it's indicative of, how when you're super hungry, someone could give you drivel, just gruel at the table, and they say, hunger is the greatest seasoning, because everything tastes so good. But if you just keep eating and eating and eating, and you just, pig out on something, like the best tasting things just don't taste that good anymore. And my concern during that time period, at least this was just the way I observed it, was that, wow, I think we've gotten to a point where we've been like gorging ourselves at the Batman table, and now we can't even tell what really is tasty anymore. So like, I don't want that. I don't want that either. And I certainly don't want that. And so I saw those kind of funny responses, and that did concern me, because there is no guarantee in life that we will always get Batman content. one surefire way to get no Batman content is to hate everything that comes out Batman. Like to just have that predisposition, like I'm just going to pee on it before I even really give it a chance, or I'm going to find fault with it. So my personal view of Gotham and its legacy is that I hope that so many of the naysayers, it did seem like came around finally. You know, like as they earned credibility. And I just wish there had been that level of support at the very beginning. Like, hey, it's a baby show. You know, let them find their way. They'll get it. We're talking about Batman. You can't really ruin the Batman mythology. And so that for me, I always think of Gotham in those terms. Like, if you don't covet to some degree, I don't mean you have to accept everything without criticism, but if you don't covet to a certain degree the gift that you're being given, there's no guarantee that you'll continue to get more of the same.
Yeah, it's worth giving everything a shot.
Sure.
You know, that's kind of how I went into Gotham. It was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to like this or not, but I'll give it a shot and see how it goes. And I stuck with it till the end of season 1, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is now one of my favorite shows. So does anybody else have any thoughts about season 5 or want to share some favorite moments, favorite episodes?
I relate to what you said earlier about not really being a Batman fan.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up when Batman was Adam West,
Mm-hmm.
and to me that's always been Batman.
Yeah.
I really didn't read a lot of the comics, so I knew some of the villains because of that show. So when Gotham came out, because it was a superhero show, it went on my DVR list because I watch all of them.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. And I'm a lot like you guys in that the first few episodes, I went, oh, this is kind of interesting. What kept me going, first of all, I found the show to be somewhat darker than a lot of the other superhero shows. And I thought, oh, can I handle this? Because I'm sorry, I cannot watch the Dark Knight movies. They're too dark for me.
Okay.
And it just gives me, I can't sleep.
Mm.
And so I
That's
said, I
understandable.
can't do it. So I wanted to be sure that this wasn't going to be the same thing. But I kept watching it, and my key was I loved the guy who plays Penguin. He
Mhm.
made that show for me.
Mhm.
And watching him every week and then watching some of the other characters. And I enjoyed seeing a character come on and think to myself, I know which villain that guy's going to be. Or I know which villain that girl's going to be. You know, and try to see if I was right. And I loved the last season. I thought all of it. I got really into it. And a friend of mine says, oh, I can't watch it. It's too dark. I said, you got to stick with it because it's intriguing. And I believed that the whole show was about the origin of where these villains came from. And they made them human. They gave
Mm-hmm.
real humanity to these people. I mean, I even felt sorry for Cobblepot. You know, he got picked on in the
Yeah.
first few episodes there, you know, and everything. So as the season went on, I got really invested in some of these characters. And so by the time, I really enjoyed I think it was the last episode, when finally Penguin came out. And he looked like Burgess Meredith.
Yeah.
Yes, he really
like,
did.
Whoa, he's Penguin now! It was, and I got so excited seeing that come out of that is all these characters coming out as someone I recognized from the Batman I knew when I was a kid. And I thoroughly enjoyed this show, and I'm a lot like you. I really wished it kept going.
Me too.
Well, it's so funny because I think Gotham had a lot of shades of Batman 66. The fact
I
that
think it did,
all the
yeah.
villains were kind of around and hanging out with the, because on Batman 66, the villains would get together all the time.
Mhm.
Yeah, and when
Get
you
up to
guys were
shenanigans.
talking about characters, I don't think I could ever see an Alfred and not see Sean Pertwee.
He was
Oh,
great.
yeah.
He was a wonderful
I think my wife would agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. He was, every time I see him, I want to call him Alfred.
Did you have some?
Yeah, you mentioned, something I thought of when you mentioned the camel work and whatnot. Aside from Supergirl, is this the DC, the on-screen DC product that we've seen that actually has the most daylight in it? Because it seems like, I mean, certainly in the Zack Snyderverse, every day is pitch black and raining, and Arrow seems to be, the Arrowverse seems to typically be a very nighttime show. And I'm wondering to what extent that seems to have an impact on how things play out.
Well, in Gotham, if it's not nighttime or blackness or raining, you're not doing Gotham right, in my opinion, because Gotham is supposed to be a dark, gritty, nasty, horrible place that nobody wants to live in, and that's why you need a Batman. And so I think that the show did a really good job in terms of the lighting, because it's dark and horrible and scary, but then you would have light coming through a window or something like that, where it would bring a little light into that world. So it wasn't necessarily that they would shoot a lot of things outdoors in the daytime, although they did, but they made use of the light even in the nighttime scenes that really impacted the scene, because they interjected some of the intentional lighting into the shot. But yeah, I think for a lot of those shows, that's a show-by-show basis. The Arrowverse people behind the scenes would tell you that they like to shoot things at night because it's better for the costumes. It's a little more forgiving of the costumes that they have to wear.
And certainly, I mean, on a show, you have to be very judicious about budget. It goes back to the old Hammer horror idea. If you just shoot things in the dark, it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
But I mean, it certainly seems that there's such a wide, I guess, array of emotion on the Gotham series, whereas other DC shows, it seems like every single character needs a Zoloft at every moment.
Yeah, and I think you're also speaking of maybe those exterior shots.
Yeah.
There were some in Gotham throughout the years where there was a lot of sunlight. But then, of course, I think they may have CGI'd that you'd have the clouds in the back. You could see clearly, like, oh, darkness is coming. But I think one reason that some of the brighter shots worked is because of the exterior settings that they picked were very nasty looking, So the bright light kind of accentuated this is a terrible, guttery kind of, hole in the wall type of apartment building we're standing next to. And so it would just look like, it would look like death. The kind of place you wouldn't want to go when it's dark. You would only go in the bright daylight. So I think that's why some of those shots work too.
No offense to New Yorkers, because the show was shot in New York, so
Yes,
some of that was probably not something that they did. It was just kind of natural to New York.
I remember reading that they had to scout out those areas because so much of New York City is now clean and sophisticated and tourist friendly.
Yeah.
So they had to kind of ignore those parts and go for some of those older sections that looked like they were stuck in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's that time. So thank you all for coming by to talk about some Gotham
Thank
and
you so
season
much.
5.
Give yourself a round of applause. Yes, thank you.